Tony Dungy, NBC Football Night in America analyst, joining us on behalf of All Pro Dad, which is partnering with the Florida Department of Education for Take Your Child to School Day on September 26th. Though through All Pro Dad, the chapters nationwide, parents can be active in their child's school, not just this month, but every month. And Tony joins us courtesy of the Continental Tire Coach's Corner. Hey, Coach, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, and I was on both sides of that Dan Marino situation. We still had Terry Bradshaw. It was my third year, I think, coaching with the Steelers. We passed on Marino in the '83 draft, and you're right. I think he was splitting time with David Woodley maybe at the time. And Coach Shula brought him in, and he played great that rookie year. Second year, he probably got half of those touchdown passes on us. He threw a bunch against us in 2 games. So I saw it live and up close.
Did you scout Marino? What was your job title with the Steelers back then?
I was a defensive assistant, but I'll never forget. Marino had a great junior year, a little bit subpar, people thought, senior year. And he still played very well, but he lit it up as a junior. In the senior year, he didn't. They came over. We brought his 2 receivers, Julius Dawkins and Dwight Collins, over for a workout in Three Rivers Stadium. It was cold, and the wind was blowing 100 miles an hour, and those balls were just rifling through the wind right on target, and Julius Dawkins dropped every ball that came to him. And I remember thinking to myself, I know why he had a little bit of a down senior year. These guys can't catch. But we knew all about him and loved him. Coach Snow loved him, but we still had Bradshaw at the time, and so it just didn't seem like the right thing to do. He went to Miami. At the back end of the draft, Miami still had a very good team, and it was just a perfect situation.
But do you see any parallels between the Steelers back then that you don't want to bring in your replacement for Terry Bradshaw, Hall of Famer, and what's going on with the Giants, that they could have drafted Sam Darnold as the successor to Eli Manning?
That's one thing that stuck with me, Dan, the rest of my career. If you get a chance, if you have someone that you think is a franchise quarterback, and you have a chance to draft him, you need to draft him, no matter what else is on your roster. We didn't take Dan Marino, and for 20 years, until Ben Roethlisberger, they were still trying to get quarterbacks, and we went through a ton of them. And so when I got to Minnesota and worked for Denny Green, and he had the same philosophy. He drafted some Dante Culpepper when they had Randall Cunningham, Brad Johnson, Jeff George on the roster. It doesn't matter. If you think that guy is legit and for real and you have a chance to take him, you better take him.
I had a couple of questions. We had a poll question. If you were a player, would you rather play for Bill Belichick or Mike Tomlin?
I know a little bit. I think most players would say Mike Tomlin, but I know a little bit more about Bill Belichick through Rodney. And Rodney says you can't go by everything you hear. He had a lot of fun playing for Belichick. Of course, you're going to win. That's a tough question. I don't think and you always get me to answer. I don't think I could answer that one because I like Mike Tomlin's style. Being around Mike, I'd probably have to say I'd rather play for Mike.
But is he too easygoing? I wonder if his personality has led to this, where he has big personalities, and it feels like those big personalities sometimes get out of hand.
That I don't know. I don't think he's too easygoing. I think it's just, I think he tries to treat people like men, and sometimes that backfires on you when you have guys that aren't men yet. And he probably does need to go to Antonio Brown and say, look, you got to just chill with all this social media. You've got to get on board and tighten things up. And, maybe he needs to do that. But I think his flaw, if anything, is trying to treat them like adults.
Yeah, this thing with Antonio Brown, is this a big deal?
It is, I remember I came to Pittsburgh as a rookie in 1977. Mel Blount was holding out. He had been the defensive player of the year in 75. He was asked for $100,000, and he was holding out. And they said, no way we can pay defensive players that much. And then they had this trial. George Atkinson sued Chuck Noll, and Chuck had made a criminal element comment, and then I guess one of the lawyers said, well, don't you have some criminal element on your team? And Coach Noll said, well, yeah, Mel Blount could fall into that category. So Mel said, hey, I'm never playing for the Steelers again. And I asked some of the players, I said, man, our team's falling apart here. Mel, player of the year, he's never going to play for the Steelers again. And they said, hey, don't worry, as soon as the national anthem and the fight's on, he'll be back. And sure enough, he was. And we won a couple of more Super Bowls. So I think a lot of that can get blown out of proportion.
I don't remember Chuck Noll being involved in a lawsuit with the Raiders' George Atkinson where he...
Oh, yeah, it was huge. Atkinson actually went after Swan and just, really stuff that you'd be suspended for life now if some of those hits. And Coach Noll said, well, they've got a criminal element on their team. And then Atkinson and Tatum, I think those guys ended up suing Coach Noll. And there was a big trial out in California right before the 77 season. Yeah.
Oh, God. So defamation of character, is that what it was, or slander?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, here's another.
But again, those some of those hits, now guys wouldn't even be able to be allowed on the field now, and they were just everyday commonplace hits back then.
Which leads me to Clay Matthews' tackle, and we were discussing it yesterday. You were kind enough to tweet, and you had some thoughts about this. But just that play alone, if I look at the play, given today's rules, because if we're using last year's, then it's probably different. But today's rules, should Clay Matthews have been flagged for that hit on Kirk Cousins?
I don't think so, because in my opinion, he didn't pick him up and drive him down. He didn't put his whole body weight. He didn't drive him into the turf. He picked him up, and they slid, and it was more of a parallel going to the ground. So I didn't think it fell under any of the categories. But as I said, and I told you yesterday, it's like basketball referees and baseball umpires. You have to know who's calling the game and what type of game they're calling. Tony Corrente had called that hit a personal foul on the Vikings earlier. So you've got to be smart enough to say, hey, they're calling them tight. Today, I've got to understand that. If you have different referees, and we used to have scouting report. Our defensive line coach would come in and say, hey, here is, the referee that we've got today, Jerry Austin. He's called 7 roughing the passer penalties in the last 8 games. He's called two-step violation. He's called driving the quarterback, and this is what he looks for, blow to the head. So you're not going to be able to do that. Hey, this referee's only called 1 roughing the passer all year. You got a little more freedom. But right now with these new rules, the players don't know that yet. They'll get an idea of what each referee calls, and they'll adjust, and I think you'll see less penalties as we go forward.
But that's what I don't understand, Tony. If a strike is a strike in baseball, and if pass interference or holding or roughing the passer, I mean, it feels like those have definitions. A strike zone there is a zone there, but we have umpires and referees and officials who have their own interpretation to that. Why do we allow open to interpretation?
Well, I think it's the way the rule is drawn up. When you say the rule says you can't forcibly drive them into the turf. Well, to me, my definition of what's forcible and what's really driving a guy into the turf might be different than it is for you, and that's where it comes up.
Before I let you go, All Pro Dad, if you'd like to explain what you and your wife are doing with All Pro Dad.
Yeah, it's a real neat organization. Actually started down here in Tampa in 1998. Several of our coaches, we were trying to figure out how we could spend a little more time with our kids, given the schedules. And we came over to Family First and got some good ideas and some good information. And then we had an event at our training camp practice. And back then we weren't very good. We were getting about 50 people a day coming out to watch us practice. And we said, hey, dads, bring your kids out and enjoy some time with the family and watch us play, and we'll give away some events, and you'll get to meet some of the players. And we had about 4,000 people that came. So we said, hey, getting men who might be interested in football might be a good idea. And so it started then, and it's grown And now we're just involved. We've got a great website, allprodad.com, where men can go to get ideas on how they can connect better with their children and be a better dad.
That's great. Speaking of Tampa, has Ryan Fitzpatrick earned this job?
I think he has. And I was at their training camp 2 weeks ago, right before the regular season started. They knew what was coming. But I'll tell you what, they had tremendous confidence because the organization built this team around Jameis Winston. They drafted him number 1, and they said, we're going to give him some weapons. So they got Mike Evans, who's a talented big receiver. They went out and got Deshaun Jackson, a speed guy. They drafted O.J. Howard. So there's weapons there. And what Ryan has done, he knows the game. He knows the other team's weaknesses. He knows where to throw the ball. And they saw this coming. They said, hey, we might not win every game, but we're going to put up points while Jameis is out. And now that they're winning, I think you've got to stay with it.
How much trouble the New York Giants in?
With that offensive line, they're in a lot of trouble. I picked them. I thought they would win against Dallas because I thought Eli would have more weapons to throw the ball to than Dak Prescott had. But you've got Saquon Barkley, who they're having trouble getting back to the line of scrimmage. He had the one long run, but he broke about 6 tackles on that run. They're not able to pass protect and give Eli time. Until they get that offensive line straightened out, they're going to have a tough time winning.
Yeah, I don't think they're getting that offensive line straightened out this year, Tom.
So you don't think there's any Jim Parkers that are just going to show up and play for them?
No, they'd take Big John Hicks right now.
Yeah, he would probably look pretty good right now.
Good to visit with you. Tell the boys, tell Mike and Rod I said hello. Thank you, Tone.
I will. We miss you, DP.
That's Tony Dungy, Football Night in America.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.